Hi, my name is David, and I'm going to tell you about my sister Angela, who is a sociopath. Please like and subscribe. There was always something wrong with my sister Angela. It seemed like I was the only one who knew something was up for the longest time. When we were young, we would frequently visit our little cousins. We would go to their place, and they would come over to ours. My mom and aunt would share a bottle of wine and bond over their grief about losing their husbands, my uncle in the grave, and my dad in prison. Despite the fact that I was much older than the other kids, I'd still hang out with them in order to keep an eye on my sister as a safety precaution. Even back then, I was aware of the fact that someone would wind up hurt if I left her alone with them. One time, she clipped a clothes peg on their pet cat and watched it run in circles around the room. She was only 12. Another time, she'd pressured our youngest cousin, Ollie, to drop that same cat, the poor thing, out a second-story window, mocking him for not wanting to do it. "You're scared? I can't believe you're actually scared." A confused Ollie had let go of his beloved pet by the time I managed to climb the stairs. Thankfully, the cat was fine, but Ollie was not. He was traumatized, screaming and crying, refusing to leave his bedroom. "I'm sorry, Mom. I really had no idea it would be this bad. I was only curious because I learned in school the other day that cats could survive falls from such heights. I just wanted to see it for myself." I thought it was all rubbish. Angela had never felt sorry for a day in her entire life. But our mom fell for it every time because Angela was her special little girl. After our dad was taken away, our maternal grandfather came over frequently to help Mom out. Angela and I hardly knew my father's parents, so I was very close to Grandpa. I looked up to the man. He was never in a bad mood, and if he was, he never showed it. He filled a void in the house that existed for a very long time. He filled it with music, dancing, and his roaring laughter. He taught me things that my father never could, like riding a bicycle or knotting a tie smartly. When Mom wasn't home, he'd teach me how to use the dusty power tools that Dad had left in the basement. It didn't matter what we did. I simply found comfort in having him there, with me, waking up every day to find him sitting at the kitchen table reading the paper, only to drop it right away so we could cook breakfast together for the family. He had given me a small military medal he owned, and he told me the story about how he'd almost died earning it. He told me that he wasn't much older than me when he was awarded that medal. It didn't feel right for me to keep it, but since he was earnest about passing it down to me, I kept it, and it made him happy when he saw the medal pinned to my backpack the next day. Now, I can always be with you wherever you go, even when I'm buried 6 feet under. He was joking, of course, but he knew that I would need his guidance even in death. Grandpa appeared to be a jolly old man, but he was sharper than he seemed. Even I could tell that he knew something was very wrong with his granddaughter. And without him, things were only going to worsen for the rest of us. Angela did nothing to hide her contempt for the relationship that I had with Grandpa. She would always look at us with that scowl on her face. When Grandpa passed away, she came to my room with bright eyes and a large grin on her face. "Aw, you sad that Grandpa's dead?" I screamed and ran to tell Mom about it, but when she asked about it, Angela pretended to be ignorant, and my mother was in no state of mind to deal with her. During the funeral services, I noticed Angela was staring at me like I was a source of entertainment for her. I tried my best to hold in all emotions as to not give her any satisfaction. Although it did dull her attention towards me, it only heightened everybody else's interest. Apparently, some people were asking my mother what was wrong with me. The fact that my expressions were being scrutinized and judged while Angela got away unnoticed drove me insane, especially since I was the one truly grieving the loss of our grandfather. The following week, I returned home from school to find the medal that he had given me had fallen off my backpack, which crushed me even further. Despite my mother's attempts to cheer me up, I was completely inconsolable. And my dear sister Angela just sat there, watching me, looking amused. "Who's gonna watch over you now, big brother?" I don't know what came over me. I shoved her hard. And understandably, Mom grounded me. It's not easy for me to admit this, but I was so furious. I really did think about killing Angela that night. The effect Angela had on me had extended even beyond her reach. There was this ever-present distrust in my mind, a constant paranoia, a cancerous red flag that always fluttered. I spent my whole life watching my sister to pretend to be something she was not. When you're at the supermarket and the cashier asks you, "How are you doing?" and you say, "I'm good, how are you?" But you don't actually care. And they don't care either. It had gotten to the point that I was worried this was true for everyone in my life, always. I detested that no one else could see through my sister's fake, sickly, sweet ways, and began to think that superficial conversation and hollow interactions were the norm. As I grew older, I kept to myself and made very few friends. Angela's reign of terror continued into high school. I spent 1 year there without her, and it was the best year of my life. It felt freeing not to have her around in my proximity. Then, she joined as a freshman, and I started spending afternoons in the school counselor's office. I never did say much, however, so Mr. Wallace treated me like every other anxiety-ridden student by offering me numerous breaks and check-ins. How could I possibly tell him that I was terrified of my 14-year-old little sister, the sweet young freshman who was charming everyone at her new school? She quickly adapted to her new environment. She put on that sheep's clothing and did what she knew best, hurt and hide. She was much smarter about it now than when she was a kid. Her slyly executed actions were always just painful enough to traumatize her victims, but simple enough to be overlooked by others. She'd date boys and break their hearts just to get back together and break up with them all over again. On the outside, it looked like just a casual teenage drama, but I knew she was deliberately doing it for kicks. She would even toe the line with her male teachers, keep her best friend wallowing in self-pity, and tell her classmates that I was an abusive brother. I couldn't take it, and I hated myself even more over the fact that I let her get away with it. The thought of her smug smirk as she soaked gleefully in the sorrow she caused everywhere just made me see red. But I knew that if I pushed, she'd push back harder. I had to ensure that I was out of her vision and out of her mind. Then I met Miss Henson, the school's newly appointed counselor. She had noticed how often I visit the reset room in the past and that she wanted to get to know me. I wasn't as receptive towards her at first, but Miss Henson never gave up on me. I met with her on a weekly basis, and in time, I found myself opening up to her. I liked her. She seemed different. She didn't talk to me from a position of authority or with any condescension. I felt like the person that she was inside that room with me was the same person when she was outside of it, which meant more to me than she could ever know. My wall came down, which had rarely happened before, and one day she asked me what I was afraid of, and everything started spilling out of me. I kept going and I couldn't stop. The release came with a sense of relief that I'd never experienced before. But it wasn't long that Angela confronted me at her locker. "What did you say to her? Miss Henson just asked me to meet with her. What did you say to her, you lying snitch?" She was furious. I couldn't bring myself to look at my 5-foot freshman of a little sister in the eye. I was scared. I pretended to dig around in my locker like I was looking for something. Nothing. I continued rummaging around my locker in the hopes that she'd walk away, or that someone else would notice and come by and talk to me. But nobody around us paid any attention. It might have looked like a sweet moment to be cherished between siblings. But of course, that was not to be. Suddenly, Angela slammed the locker on my hand. I howled and cursed out loud enough to freeze the entire corridor. A few teachers came running out of their classrooms as students buzzed with confusion. Those nearby gasped and cried for help. I slid to the floor, holding my hand to the chest, afraid to look at it. Angela had already disappeared from the scene. I was lucky enough to have escaped with just a bruise on the top of my hand, nothing worse. It did hurt to bend my fingers, but it was better than a severed finger, I guess. Thankfully, Angela got in trouble with the school and with Mom as well. But what seemed to have bothered her the most was the fact that the character she had put on for everyone was now unraveling. Her friends were now noticing things she never wanted them to notice, and seeing her in a light she had never wanted to cast upon herself. One of the upperclassmen called her Little Ginger Snap, and it caught on. She absolutely hated it, and she knew that it was only going to get worse. Miss Henson was now looking to meet with Angela on a regular basis, and I was ecstatic to know that Angela would soon discover that her usual tricks were no match for that compared to a trained professional. Someone was finally going to see through the feigned innocence, the tales of grandeur, and the timely sob stories. But was she actually going to let this happen? Not if she could help it. And thus began the game of chess. When Angela skipped on her session with Miss Henson called home. When Mom scheduled a joint meeting, Angela ate soap in the bathroom and made herself throw up. I'll admit, I was curious to see how long this battle would last. One could never underestimate how far Angela was willing to go to have her way. But she was also smart enough to realize that any further resistance would just be seen as another piece of evidence against her. I reveled in her misery the day she finally gave in. It wasn't long before Miss Henson suggested Mom ought to take Angela to a clinical psychologist. She explained that Angela was showing worrying signs of an antisocial personality disorder. As ignorant and naive as my mother had been, she could no longer deny it. Angela was a real-life, near-diagnosable, manipulative sociopath. Poor Mom was undone. She sobbed while pacing the kitchen floor with a cigarette in her shaking hand. She was at a loss for ideas, so she did exactly what was recommended of her. Angela was to see the psychologist every week. Sometimes Mom and I were to join her. I could barely hold in my excitement over seeing Angela being uncomfortably vulnerable the way she made everybody else feel. I noticed her glaring at me throughout these joint sessions. Though it wasn't easy, I tried my best to appear neutral and to like my sister and not show any type of emotion. I watched as she spoke no truth during these sessions. She blamed her behavior on her father's absence. Mother and the doctor insisted that she was slowly but surely making progress, but I refused to fall for it, and Angela knew. Every time she got home from a session, she would glare at me for a few seconds before shutting herself away in the room for the night. And it was only then that I could finally breathe easy, though not for very long. I started sleeping with a damn knife under my pillow, just in case. I started feeling ridiculous for doing so, but my paranoia reminded me not to underestimate how far this girl was willing to go to get what she wanted. And right now, it felt like she wanted me gone. A few weeks passed. It was hard to tell if the behavioral therapy was having any real effect on Angela. The psychologist reminded my mother to have patience, but Mom was getting paranoid and hysterical. So she ended up doing the worst thing anyone could do. She went online. She stayed up reading all night whatever nonsense she came across, from dietary treatments of personality disorders to early signs that your daughter is a serial killer. It was insane, and it made my mother even crazier. That was when she found out about Dr. Elderson. He ran a small clinic down in Portland, which was a few hours' drive from us. His website claimed he was an expert in psychology with a particular emphasis on the treatment of personality disorders. She also found a news article about the work he had done in collaboration with the FBI in catching the Salt Lake Killer, who he had gone on to establish a relationship with in order to write the book he made sure to advertise on his website. Mom wrote to Dr. Elderson, and his team responded almost immediately, promising that they could help us with our situation. The man claimed to have invented a procedure that could alter the pathways in Angela's brain that made her the way she was, and rewire them to function normally, for a hefty fee, of course. Desperate, my mother didn't hesitate. Mom and I drove down that weekend, and she signed every waiver they threw at her. A surgery was scheduled for the day after school closed for the summer, just 6 weeks away. She even booked a hotel room for the few days Angela would be spending in recovery after the procedure. I thought she was absolutely out of her mind for this, and even more so for believing that Angela would just allow all this to happen in the first place. They had an intense argument when Mom got back home and told Angela about the appointment she'd made.
Why would you do this to me? Why? You think there's something so gravely wrong with me?
Yes, Angela, yes! It hurt my mother to say this, but what Angela said next hurt her even more.
Well, I'm your daughter. You raised me. This is who you've raised.
Angela knew that this was the very thing that would hurt our mother the most.
I didn't raise you to act like this. I want to go to another school. What? Why? What's wrong with your school? Everyone there thinks I'm crazy now. Send me to St. John's Prep.
I don't have the money for that, Angela.
Then cancel the appointment. It's either the procedure or I'll have you committed into a mental health care facility. Which one will it be?
That shut Angela up faster than anything I'd ever seen, and she walked off to her room. In her absence, Mom released the sobs she'd been holding in the entire time as I sat awkwardly across the room, taking in what I'd just witnessed. I felt bad, but I was glad to see my mother stand her ground for once. I half expected Angela to run away that night, or worse. I ended up barricading my bedroom door and kept a firm grip around the knife under my pillow as I slept. But the days passed without incident. Angela went to school, walked home, did her homework, ate dinner, and went to bed. It was unnerving, and I told Miss Henson as much. I'd been seeing Miss Henson more frequently at the end of the school year. She couldn't talk to me about her sessions with Angela, of course, but she did indulge me on the topic. I ranted about how Angela was a monster and how the world would be better off without her in it. To my surprise, Miss Henson stopped me and explained that I'd gotten my sister all wrong. She told me that I'd vilified her for so long that I'd stopped seeing her as a real person. This frustrated me.